Ladies and gentlemen, if I went outside right now, here in New York City, and I asked people on the street to name a chess player you've seen in the headlines recently, name any chess player, there's a very good chance they name one of three people. Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura, Hans Niemann. Maybe in that order, maybe in a different order. They might throw me in there, might throw somebody else from their home nation in there. But those are the answers that you would get. Like it or not, they're the three most popular chess players in the world right now. And they all played each other. Yesterday, we had Hikaru versus Hans, we had Hikaru versus Magnus, and we had Magnus versus Hans. I mean, the triangle, the love triangle of the best speed players in the world, and the most popular ones. And I will be covering all of these games for you today. Every single one of them played the other. It was a lot of fun. It was during, of course, the Title Tuesday tournaments. And the very first game that I'm going to show you is this one, is Hikaru versus Hans. This one was the bronze medal match at the recently completed Speed Chess Championship here in 2024. If you are watching this at some point in the future, then you don't know that happened, and that's okay. You might also be watching this. You have no idea what the significance of any of these players are. All good. When you're done watching here, just go look up Hans Niemann. Go down the rabbit hole of Hans Niemann and enjoy yourself. Okay, E4, E5. I also have to remember there is a Netflix show coming out about the entire Hans Niemann thing. That's going to be out in 2025. So maybe people are watching this from Netflix. I don't know. I don't know. But hello if you're watching this in the future. It doesn't happen at the time of recording it. So Hikaru and Hans play their game. It's E4, E5. We have knight F3. We have knight C6. Bishop C4, bishop C5. Now, this has been a pretty big budding rivalry. And obviously, it was kind of put to rest at the Speed Chess Championship when Hikaru won in convincing fashion. But that doesn't mean that it's always going to be like that. D3, knight F6, C3, D6. Very solid game. Rook E1, completely normal lines. Knight BD2, and H3. Hans is not committing his A or B pawns, and Hikaru also has not committed his A pawn because white never played A4, trying to play B4 and A5. Now Hikaru plays A5. This is almost always a useful move. Hans puts the bishop on B3. And he has ideas to play knight c4. He has ideas to go over here. We have bishop e6. And he threatens the knight on c6. Threatens is a strong description. But you always have an idea maybe to capture this, to play for d4. And here Hikaru plays knight d7. All of this has been played many, many, many times. Knight d7 gets out of the center. If white goes for, let's say, take, and d4, this is simply mistimed, as now black can create counterplay with the f-pawn. Not to mention, black can always play a4, restricting the queen side, and white's pieces just aren't particularly active. So knight back to f1, Hans continuing to maneuver, and Hikaru goes for this break f5. We have pawn takes f5, bishop f5, knight g3, and the bishop goes back to g6. So it's clear black is taking some risks. Open rook, strong bishop. But the best way to meet an attack on the side of the board is to strike in the center, and Hans plays this move in 1 second. So clearly well aware that that is the best move, and he responds to Hikaru in the best way. And white has many choices here, like he can give some checks, he can maybe trade the dark squared bishop, but this is the best move and shows an understanding of the position by Hans. We have pawn takes on d4. And now you can take with the pawn, but you can also take with the knight. Taking with the knight is not as good because you're just opening this up for no reason. So even something like knight takes, pawn takes, you can't quite play queen f6 now because I think this knight is hanging. But you can actually play queen f6, for example, in this position, and that's not something that you really want to deal with. So that is why he plays pawn takes d4, and now queen f6 is simply less powerful. You just defend the center with bishop e3 or whatever. Hikaru plays knight b4, and now Hans is actually winning if he sacrifices this bishop, which is bananas, and after g takes h6, rook e6 is the point. That is the point, right, there you go. So, I mean, it's not clear at all. Queen d2, king g7, it looks like you're defending yourself, but white's attack is simply too powerful. Now, Hans doesn't spot that. He plays bishop b3 check. I mean, I kind of get it. You spend 2 seconds on the move. You're not going to find bishop h6. Hikaru plays king h8. And just very simple bishop e3. Knight f6, queen out, battery, sacrifice is possible. Hikaru with queenside counterplay. And it's clear that Hikaru has gotten the better of the position. Hans didn't pounce on his opportunity. And now Hikaru's going to have very quick counterplay here with queen and rook. Hans decides, well, I don't want to just sit around and suffer. Bishop takes h6. Right? And here, Hikaru kind of surprises me when I was looking at this game. Black can take on h6. But if you take on h6 and bishop h7, white gets a powerful initiative. But there is a move here, knight d3. And including this move before taking on h6 is good because now you have the knight going to h7. Why? Because here there is a rook hanging. Now, obviously, you know, knight h7 you got to see. And then even here, you gotta know that this position is good. But including knight d3, which would attack the rook and prevent that, was very important. Hikaru instead acknowledges the sacrifice. He actually spends a minute on this move. And part of me is like, you know, you think about the psychology of playing Hans. It's very different than the psychology of playing me. Like, if I was playing Hikaru and I sacrificed this bishop, I think he would be looking at a refutation. But because Hans is 3180, he's a very strong player. Not to mention the whole element of playing Hans, like the chip on the shoulder, the trash talk, everything. Sometimes maybe subconsciously you play a little bit more respectfully and defensively. So he goes back to h7, and Hans continues to barrel forward. And all of a sudden, Hikaru is losing. And actually here, Hans could sacrifice his queen and then take and then go back and cause a bunch of havoc. He does this, and it's actually all the same. Hans is just up a pawn. He's up a pawn, and he has the compensation. So he's got a good position. Hikaru respected the attack, and Hans is just winning. He's winning this game. Queen back to e7, knight g5. They trade the bishops. Hans goes to c4. He's going to bring the rook next. Hikaru can't move his rook off the a file. So he goes a3 because he's trying to get rid of the weakness, but that actually, you know, the 8th rank is now weak. Queen e2, knight h4, not necessarily the best, but 5 seconds for Hikaru, 30 seconds for Hans. Hans has Hikaru pinned up against the ropes. Dubois versus Joshua. Like, he's just waiting to land that knockout punch. The queen is going to e8. Hikaru's 2 moves away from getting mated. Queen f6, only defensive move. Rook into e6. I mean, the position looks completely lost, but now Hikaru finds knight back jump to c7, forking the queen and the rook, forcing a queen trade. Dude, Hikaru is like a defensive god. 5 seconds on the clock. Knight c7 is ridiculous. Hans here, I mean, he had a couple of different winning moves, but they were slow. Now we're in an endgame, and still Hikaru is losing. I mean, look at this. Knight f5, the bishop back to f6. Rook b7 is the best move. All of a sudden, Hans is down to 12 seconds. Bishop e5, f4, but Hans is still winning. Look at Hikaru. King and knights just pinned on the back rank. There's absolutely no salvation. c5, rook e7, knight h6 check. And rook b8 was winning there. Hans plays rook e7, rook back to a8, check. I mean, Hikaru literally has 0 moves here. How is he possibly going to survive? Knight f7, rook c8, g4. Hikaru plays d5 looking for counterplay. Hans is a move or 2 away from delivering the final blow. g6, knight back to f8. And in this position, Hans lost on time. He probably couldn't decide whether to make a slow move. Like, if you play a slow move here, maybe Hikaru begins untangling somehow. Like, you want to get your h-pawn, but it's not so easy. Maybe he was also looking at, for example, knight g4, de h5. Does he have enough time to do this? Apparently he does. Maybe he was looking at something else, like knight f7, maybe even bishop g5. d3, you have bishop f6, knight f6, g7. And you're winning. But he couldn't get a move off in time. The nerves. And he flagged in a totally winning position. I mean, he was dominating this game. It was a really, really well-played game. But he goes down. He doesn't pull it off. And, it's the end of the game. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Hans can't pull it off. That was a really, really nice game, too. And by the way, I just got to give some credit. I mean, again, it's 30 seconds to 5. Like, if you're Hikaru, how does Hikaru save these games? 5 seconds to 30, and he's dead lost, and he wins. He keeps the game going for long enough that the opponent can't convert it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Magnus Hans. All right. Since coming back to Title Tuesday, I think Magnus has like 4 wins and 1 draw. He has not let Hans beat him a single time. Knight f3. d5. g3. He plays a ready. He plays a double fianchetto ready. Hans playing very principled. c5. c4. And I think Magnus has chosen this approach against Hans. He plays the bishops like this. He plays a very positional game, kind of a slow game. He doesn't want Hans to be in any form of opening preparation. That's what it seems like. b4, very provocative move, trying to get this pawn off the board. And then actually, there are some lines where a3 is very nice. And after ba3, you take here, you're going to win this pawn back, and you have a lot of central presence. Whereas black has these kind of flank pawns, which could be targets. Hans plays knight c6, b5, knight back to b8. And actually, from the opening, it was Magnus who obtained a nice position. Here, DE actually is better to keep a symmetrical. I'm not saying I would have played that. I'm just saying that that's what, is agreed upon. But FE played in 4.9 seconds is probably fine as well. Ideas of D4, ideas of D3, E4, H3, put a bunch of things on the light squares and see what happens. Knight goes to D7, and Magnus obviously doesn't have to think too much. Improves his structure, gains more space. Knight B6. Knight a3. That's actually a wrong move. Queen b3, holding everything. I think he didn't like that because bishop f5, but here you're just too fast. Your initiative is too quick. Whereas knight a3, you are not preparing the move a5 because black can play a5 himself. And now you cannot take en passant. So Magnus goes for the center. That is actually the incorrect approach because after knight g4, he's worse. Queen e2, bishop h6. Here, knight takes a4 was just a hanging pawn. Just straight up a pawn hanging on a4. I don't know if both guys missed that, but that's crazy. If knight a4 happened, I think Hans goes on to win this game pretty easily. Just a one mover. It's a hanging pawn. The center is collapsing. Maybe he didn't think that, but you can even sacrifice, by the way, because b2 is hanging. So crazy. Knight a4 is just there, and Magnus in 15 moves is losing against Hans. Hans doesn't play it either. And now the position stabilizes, and actually it's Hans who is worse. He's getting overrun by the pawns. What is going on? How did that happen? Knight to d5, rook d1, and now it's easy peasy. It's just, you gotta just take some space, improve your position, but then again, here, knight takes b6. You can't take because queen c2. Now, this one's a little bit different because at the end there is bishop b7. But after rook d8, apparently black is just better. Like, it looks like white is better, but actually black is better because he's winning the pawn. He has a lot of pressure on the position. It's a super complicated game. Instead of that, we have knight f6. But what we also have is Magnus down nearly a minute. He has 40 seconds on the clock. So Hans just kept playing very quickly, defending against the pawns, trading some pieces. The players were repeating here, and Magnus down to 18 seconds. So Hans is just very, 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 very fast. He's very fast. Like, he doesn't always play the best move, but he is fast. He keeps the game practical. He keeps it going. Oh, my neck is stiff. f6. e4 kicks the knight out of the center of the board. The knight goes to b4. And now, I mean, it should just be easy. It should just be easy. You have 3 pawns versus 1. That should ultimately be the deciding factor here. Magnus is a pawn up, and the position is relatively straightforward to play. The last chance that was had here, by the way, if any of you are wondering, takes, queen c4. Yes, this was a sacrifice of a rook. That's what that was, but I think the idea was bishop d5. However, maybe, I don't know, e6, here, and maybe Hans just didn't like how miserable this position is. He's right, it is a very difficult position. Black does have counterplay. He can create sufficient amounts of counterplay, but it's blitz. That's what happens. You know, they were repeating. He kept attacking him. He goes like this, and unfortunately for him now, bishop f3, he is just worse. And here, Magnus finds the only move. The only move to get any sort of advantage here, the only move to push the advantage forward, queen b3 check. Your bishop was pinned to your rook. Now you are checking. You're also defending d1, bishop to f2. And this is the position. You are defending this, which is defending that. You are defending this. You are attacking this. And on top of all that, this bishop has nothing. And you will slowly win by pushing everything forward together. Look at how he wins. Puts the king on a light square. Just a simple improving move, defending the rook, protecting queen h3. Centralizes the queen. Yes, black can take on a4, of course, but if you take on a4, I can take on f5. I think I can also maybe play c6. Like here, take even b7. Because queen b7, queen d8 is really nasty. So f4 puts the rook on the other side of the board. Hans trying for counterplay, but it's too fast. You're overwhelmed. 3-on-1. Even though you can sacrifice, the queen goes to f7. b7 is incoming. You trade, and this is easy peasy. Bishop a7 also works, but this is just, a5 is just the display of dominance. Like, you have the time, and there's nothing you can do. And ultimately, this is where the game ends. I mean, it was a very interesting positional game, but I cannot believe both guys blundered the pawn on a4. I guess it's just a very unnatural tactic to appear in the middle of a game, something like that. But yeah, it happened, and it was there, and crazy. So there you have it. Magnus beats Hans once he stabilizes the position to a point. But knight takes a4 was there. Hans could have beaten Magnus and Hikaru on the same day. And it's crazy because he lost both matches to them in the Speeches Championship finals. But he was completely winning. I mean, he had Hikaru on the ropes. And, I mean, if he literally took a free pawn on the edge of the board, I don't know if he would have won this game. It would have been certainly easier. But he misses it. Ultimately, Magnus is able to stabilize. Hey, we even got this matchup. Look at these ratings, man. Look at these. I mean, like, some of you could live lifetimes and combine your ratings in all those lifetimes and you wouldn't get the 3,300. I'm not even insulting you. I'll tell you when I'm insulting you. I mean, look at, you could look at me. I am like I'm 600 points lower than these guys in Blitz. 500, 400. I was like 2850 yesterday. But I'm trying to, align myself with you because, we are the common people. Sometimes I get a question like, Levy, am I closer to you in skill than you are to Magnus and Hikaru? And it's like, no, no. But it is a fascinating question. Like, the difference between me and these two in Blitz is probably like the difference between me and like a 2,100, maybe 2,200. I don't know. It's a fascinating question. But like, these guys are aliens, man. Like, have you ever been to like, you've seen some movie, like a documentary about, I don't know, outer space, or like animals that just live in like a jungle or a wilderness somewhere? That's how I feel when I look at Hikaru and Magnus. I'm like, these dudes are just like so good. I will never understand. Knight f3 is the move that Magnus chooses. Let's look at it from White's perspective. We always do. d5, by the way, same thing that he played here. But against Hans, he played a double fianchetto. And against Hikaru plays the most critical second move. Knight f3, d5, g3, g6, I think at the meta level is, at the highest level of the game, considered the best way to play. Bishop g2, bishop g7, and now black very quickly wants to play e5. So white plays d4. White can also play c4 here, looking for something in the center of the board. But okay, bishop g2, bishop g7, d4, knight d7. I've never seen knight d7. I assume Hikaru played knight d7 because he wants to... first of all, he doesn't want to show Magnus his real openings. Like, for instance, knight f6, c4, dc, or c6, or c5. This is like cutting-edge theory, and I doubt Hikaru wanted to show that, so he plays this, which I've never seen. But the point is... I think the point is designed to stop c4. After dc4, let's say, like, if you play knight a3, black wants to play knight b6. I mean, this is still fine. You can even take knight c4, queen a4. You can always get the pawn back. But for whatever reason, Magnus doesn't play c4 here, and instead he very slowly prepares c4. And by that point, Hikaru already attacks the center first. So now, if you play c4, you're probably going to trade a bunch of pieces. So it's a very interesting approach by Hikaru, knight d7. In this position. So after this game, I will go look at this move, and I will see, is this worth adding to the opening database, the opening toolbox. Otherwise, for classical, I'm not so sure. So castles, all this happens, c4, and, generally the guy that has a bit more development than his opponent probably prefers this position. By the way, I think another reason Hikaru went for this, and maybe Magnus went for this, it's completely symmetrical. Like, at the end of the day, these boys are grandmasters of meming. This is a completely symmetrical position. Generally, that benefits white, because white goes first. White breaks the symmetry. Hikaru actually can mutually break the symmetry here. I'm not even joking, because then he could take this pawn, And then after bishop d5, bishop d4, the position is still symmetrical, which is really funny. So that doesn't happen, though. We get knight d5, e4, e4, and now knight to b4. And what's interesting is that here, already, actually, black is equalized. For example, knight b3 is possible to try to open up the position. Black will take, white can take. And black here already has caught up. And again, the position is symmetrical. It's symmetrical, but there's no way to exploit anything. a4, probably even a5 is possible. Like, totally easy game. So we have e4, knight b4, and this knight is going here. That is the point. The best move here for white very well could be to close the center, allow the knight in, try to play like queen c2, give up the bishop, take and say, well, you have the bishops, but I have more space. So there is a very legitimate point to be made about d5. But then, by the way, black can go here and c4 and knight c5 and knight d3 and have a very, very nice position. So I think d5, probably, all things considered, is the best move. Knight b3 puts a little bit more pressure on the pawn on c5. Magnus calls Hikaru's bluff and is like, you want to come to d3? Come in. a3. You want to go to d3? Let's go. Let's bring waste another move. d5, b4, right? d3. The knight has moved 4 times, and guess what? It's going to move a 5th time. So, knight c1. Black has made 11 moves. Half of them nearly were with that knight, and now the knight is gone. All things point to the fact that this is bad for black. White has more pawns in the center, more development. Black is stuck. And black went knight f6, knight d5, knight b4, knight d3, and took a bishop that never moved. So, if you waste 5 moves with a piece, and you took something that never moved, what were you doing? That doesn't make any sense, right? I think that was Magnus's approach here. But after cd4, there's a problem. Because you cannot take this pawn back so easily. Why? Knight b6. Your knight is hit, this knight is hit, and the pawn on b2 is hanging. For example, knight b5, knight c4, rook c4, queen d1, rook d1. At the very least, bishop b2. And black is just up a pawn. So Magnus plays e5, which makes a lot of sense. Now if black does nothing, I play queen d4. Or knight d4 maybe. Or rook e1 and then I take on d4. And now Hikaru, before Magnus is able to settle, starts striking back. Remember, Black's disadvantages were the fact that he was lacking space and had no development. Well, now his development is going to come back. Magnus plays knight a5, restricting Hikaru. Hikaru has multiple moves here, the best of which is this very obscure bishop h6. I'm not sure a human can play this move. The point is that if the rook moves somewhere, you actually can keep pushing the pawn. That's a little bit tricky. Like, for example, this is the top line of the engine. Just put the pawn on d2. That's kind of hilarious, but Hikaru is a human, so he offers a repetition of moves, which actually happens. And then Hikaru spends a minute and plays bishop to h6. That is a Chad. That's Chad activities. So he realizes repeating the position is no good. Bishop h6. Down 30 seconds, but he thinks he's going to win. I think it's a bit of a psychological adjustment when your opponent doesn't want to repeat the position. For example, look, knight c4, knight b6, right? Knight a5. Now your opponent doesn't repeat, and you're like, oh, I actually might be in some trouble. So Magnus puts the rook in the corner, and Magnus's reaction to Hikaru not repeating the position causes him to make a substantial mistake. Obviously, he doesn't know that in the game, because the alternative is this, and that doesn't really look nice. You do open the bishop, but you are self-pinning. It's kind of hard to play a move like that. Instead, we have rook a1, and Hikaru plays d3, b4, trying to, maybe bring the rook back into the game on the second rank. Hikaru plays rook b8. Hikaru is now a few moves away from totally untangling. The bishop will get out. The rook is going to protect the pawn. He's going to be in good shape. Magnus, h4, trying to make something happen. 22 seconds versus 39. But now the bishop nuzzles in on g4. Every position, every piece is on a great position for black. Queen b3. The pawn's on d2. That d pawn, which Magnus allowed to be captured way back here, when he went for this line, he went for a3, he went for this whole sequence. Suddenly that pawn is not going to be won back. It's on d2, and it is protected very, very well. Rook d1, e6. Hikaru playing quickly. Magnus down to 7 seconds on the clock. Powerful move from Hikaru. Queen down to d3, hitting everything. Hitting the knight, hitting the rook, hitting the pawn, continuing to defend, and maybe has backup on the way. Magnus has to sacrifice material. Rook takes d2, giving up the rook. Knight takes. Ideas of knight e4 and knight f6. So Hikaru very cool, calm, and collected. Backs up. Bishop well protected. Knight infiltration stopped. Okay, the pawn on b7 is falling. Now in comes Hikaru's knight. Knight comes forward as well. In comes Hikaru's knight to c3. And Magnus down to 2 seconds. I mean, you could be the best player in the world. It's really hard to defend this position. And he doesn't. And now Hikaru's a full rook up. After knight a4, maybe white could have gone to b3. And after knight c3, at least the queen isn't attacking. And you have queen b2. Maybe you can team up your knights together. But 2 seconds on the clock. You just try to make a move. Magnus is a rook down. Hikaru backs out of the position. Looking for a couple more trades. If the queen could teleport to g7, white would win. But if I had wheels, I would be a bicycle. So queen d4, takes. And by a miracle of the chess gods, Hikaru does not blunder back rank checkmate. And he walks the king to f8. He's going to get out, and Magnus resigns. And the only person that won 2 games in this video is Hikaru. He beat Hans. It was dicey. And he beat Magnus. Now, the craziest part is Magnus went on to win Title Tuesday with 10 out of 11. His only defeat was this game, and it was a pretty damn convincing game. This was a good win. I don't know the last time that Hikaru beat Magnus in Title Tuesday. It was a while ago. It was... these are Magnus's games. It was in 2023, I think. I mean, they played the Speed Chess Championship. Yeah, I think it's been like a year. I mean, they played in the Speed Chess Championship finals. I don't know when the last time he won in Title Tuesday. Because he's lost a few times in Title Tuesday. Like, he lost to him in August, I think. They made a lot of draws. So, big win. And, I mean, it was a very, very nice win for Hikaru. Very nice win, I have to say. So, we got everything. We got all 3 big boys playing against each other. And hopefully we get a whole lot more of it. Hans had 2 very nice displays. And unfortunately in chess, it sometimes happens that you outplay your opponent for like a chunk of the game and you still lose. It's like, that's why we all love and hate this game. That's all I have for you today. Yeah, if you're watching this in the future, check out more chess videos. Check out Chessly. Got a bunch of amazing courses there for all of you to improve your chess. Beat your parent, beat your significant other, beat your boss, beat your dog, beat your cat in chess. Anyway, that's all I have. Get out of here.